All righty. Hello, and we are calling to order this meeting, excuse me, got to put my glasses on. Calling to order the Architectural Board of Review meeting for Tuesday, July 2nd. So first order of business, the call to order and the roll call.
Okay, Member Callahan?
Here.
Member Dahlman?
Here.
Member Deegan?
Here.
Member Waymeyer?
Here.
Member Kerouac?
Here.
And Chairman Pro Tem Russ?
Here.
And Chairman Hunter is absent.
All right, next order of business is to go over the meeting minutes from our June 4th meeting. So does anyone have comment, revisions, corrections, doodles?
Looks good to me.
Okay then.
I move the minutes be approved as submitted.
I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you for the minutes. Okay, item number 3 for non-agenda, got my mouth working overtime tonight. We now have the opportunity to have visitors speak, and I see that we do have one visitor who is on the agenda, so we'll speak later. And this is the time we take for any non-agenda items, and I assume we don't have any? Okay, so we'll go on to the next item, which is the discussion of amendments to the sign code for the industrial districts.
This is where I'm supposed to be, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'd like you to use the microphone because the room itself is not amplified, and this is for the recording. So yes, we'd like you to use the microphone all the time. Even
Okay.
if you need to walk up there, you can take a microphone with you.
No, I think I'm good set up right here. So just wanted to say thank you all for having me this evening. Really appreciate it. My name is Arista Strunges. I'm a principal at Camiros. We're a planning firm located in Chicago. The firm's been around about 40 years. I've been there about 20 years, and I'm a principal and partner in the firm. And the majority of the work that I do is in zoning. And I work, obviously, being located in Chicago with a lot of communities, including some of your neighbors, located here in Illinois, as well as a lot of different types of national work. So I hope that I can bring, and the majority of the jobs that we do in zoning also include sign code revisions. So I'm hoping that I can bring some of that experience over these years to you to address some of these issues within the L1, L2 districts. Hopefully everybody received the memo dated June 25th, 2019. Really why I wanted to come here tonight was to kind of quickly go over what is in the memorandum talking about sign revisions in the L1 and L2 districts. At this point, I haven't really come up with an approach. I haven't decided what any revisions are. What I really wanted to do was present my observations from taking a look at both the code, and then staff were very gracious enough to take me around this area and kind of point out the signage there. And what I've observed, and to get your feedback in terms of kind of what directions I should be going as I start to take a look at the revisions. And when I come back to you next time, it actually would be with a draft set of revisions for you to review regarding the L1, L2 districts. So very quickly in that regard, kind of drove around this area. I see it every time I come here too, because I go down Rockland Road to get here. So familiar with it. And really there's 3 types of development that are happening there. It's the large multi-tenant retail centers, places like Target, the single occupant properties, things like the North Shore University Health Systems, those kind of standalone buildings, and then multi-tenant office developments. And each of these types of developments, which is what you're really seeing in those areas, kind of presents its own set of issues. The first is the multi-tenant retail centers, and that's the kind of the primary one that I keep kind of referencing in that. I know there's Carriageway, but there's also the Target. I know they're part of a planned commercial development approval, and they have a sign packet that comes along with them, and kind of taking a look at how that's worked out, it seems to me like that could work as a good basis for other multi-tenant retail centers that would come in, just because it provides that level of coordination. It seems to be a reasonable amount of signage that's in place there. The other is the single occupant properties, and when you kind of take a look at what your current zoning code allows for those, it seems like those sign regulations might be working okay. I don't know if there's any kind of small tweaks that I need to take a look at that, but when you just have one tenant and one larger property, those sign regulations seem to kind of jive with what's going on those sites. And then the one that's a little bit more complex, and I saw I was lucky enough to kind of see the previous agenda where we talked about one of these types of centers, is these multi-tenant office developments, and they're really of two types. The one that seems a little bit more straightforward in terms of signage is when you have one building that has multiple tenants inside it, but they're all accessed really through one common entryway, and really what's advertised on the building is just that the development. It's really what's housing all those different tenants, as opposed to each tenant needing individual signage, because they don't each have an individual entryway. Which brings me to kind of the second one that I noticed when I looked, is you do have a number of office developments where each one's its own little entryway, its kind of own type of development. A lot of times those can condo out as they get older. They may start to condo each one of those separate entryways, may not be operating as kind of one big leased development at that point, and that provides a little bit more of a challenge because those folks that have the entryways, they want to put signage there. I know some level of door signage is allowed, but one of the complexities is sometimes it's not big enough or it's recessed, as kind of your previous agenda talked about, and so can that be kind of allowed to become, move more from the door to the window might be an issue that we might want to take up. And then looking at kind of how wall signs divide up by those tenants. So you've got kind of a different situation going on when everything's under the control of, say, one or two entryways, as opposed to the individual entryways. So that was kind of my observations on that point. There were just a couple of other additional items that didn't quite fit into each category of these three types I talked about. The first is because you have a larger scale of development going on in the L1 and the L2, your address signs are limited to 2 square feet, and it might be that you may want to bump that up, just kind of snowballing and trying to be more conservative, thinking maybe 8 square feet, say a 2x4 sign, that kind of advertises the address number of a much larger building, kind of works better, it's a little more in proportion. And then the other was kind of the observation of the Target store and its approval, which I also was able to get a copy of, is perhaps considering that any type of kind of multi-tenant retail center or even multi-tenant development that comes in, that they would submit a master sign plan, and that would really talk about what types of signage would be allowed for the tenants. It would help to create a more coordinated appearance, and it really control kind of how much signage is there. One of the things as I talked with staff was the idea of, you know, maybe if we require this as part of developments of a certain size, that if they're sticking within the parameters of the sign regulations that we would come up with, that it would be a master sign plan approved by the board, or the Architectural Board of Review. And then if it was something that needed to get bigger and maybe exceed what we thought were reasonable standards, that would be something similar to the way that you do things now, that master sign plan would go to the Architectural Board of Review, as well as to the Village Board for final approval, since it would be either exceeding or doing something different than what the code would allow. And so really, that's my short presentation. I just really wanted to come to you with my observations and to kind of hear your opinions about what's been going on and kind of what directions I should start looking at as I start to revise the sign regulations for L1 and L2 districts.
Okay, well, sometimes we're a little bit formal here, but mostly we're not. At least I'm not always when I'm not chairing a meeting. So we can go around the horn and see if anybody has some preliminary thoughts, and then I think just take it from there. So you always get picked on. Would you like to be last this time?
I'd like to be last.
You're one of our
because I'm not really into signs all that much.
Well, and you're one of our newest members.
Yeah,
so
I know.
It's so not fair.
I know. I've seen a little bit of the signage problems, but
Yeah, we'll go to the alphabet challenged end of the board today.
Well, I guess maybe a couple of comments or thoughts, and I don't know if you can address these or maybe it's a combination of who addresses them. When it comes to our multi-tenant buildings that we have, it seems like those are the ones that we very often have people coming in saying that they want more and they want more and they want more and they want to be represented. And when it comes to the square footage of the building and what's allowed on each, you know, building, is if we have different allowances for the total square footage, or, and I don't know exactly how it's calculated, based on how big the building is or how many entrances we have, is it going to start to be contradictory to something else where you only have one entrance or there's something else? And so I guess as long as whatever revisions we do make it so we don't end up making it so people would want to somehow say that there's something different so that they can get more, I don't know if that all makes sense, just, all these guys, they want to be able to have, you know, their building or their little shop represented. And it just doesn't seem feasible based on the amount of square footages that they're allowed to have within their building. So I guess as we're looking into it, you know, how do you make sure that it stays fair and then you don't have people that are trying to, you know, wiggle around through the system and, you know, try to get some sort of a variance or something saying, well, these guys are allowed to do this because they have multiple entrances or they're multiple stores. And so now they have more allowances, even though I'm just this one bigger building and I only have this much, so.
Okey-doke. Matt?
Yeah, I agree with that. I know like 917 Sherwood Drive is kind of an example of a snowball that's very small right now, that could get larger. You know, because everybody comes in with a very compelling reason why they need a sign, and I get that, right? I mean, new location, maybe they serve a population, you know, healthcare or something that needs to see where they are, you know, versus someone who's just out, you know, looking for some retail establishment or, and it's a very compelling case to make, but you can see that already on 917, we've started this lining the building with names, and that wasn't our intention of the code. So I'm not sure how we're gonna get around that. I guess that's why you get paid what you get paid to make it so that we're satisfied with that. But I don't see a resolution that's gonna make sense with these.
Matt?
Yeah.
Just, 917 was the one where that was the eye doctor that came in, and they came in twice, and the second
Yeah,
time they
right.
were rejected because he felt like they weren't getting the necessary visibility. Is that, just jogging my memory, is that correct? The 917 Sherwood?
Yeah, so they have the OBGYN is, you know, they were, you know, we had one name, like, so the landowner landlord said, you know, to each tenant, oh, you can get your name up there, which they can't.
Yeah.
So they came in
he
here signing the lease.
misrepresented the situation.
So we're sitting here, we're
Or
going,
the tenant may have misrepresented that. The landlord may have said, it's okay with me for you to put your name up if the village approves it. And
Yeah.
the tenant may have misrepresented that.
and that may be true. I'm sure, yeah, I shouldn't, right.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Oh, yeah, right.
Everything I
yeah.
say is allegedly
Yeah,
from now on.
allegedly, yeah.
So we're not sued as a board.
Yes.
But,
Trying to
so
remember.
I do, you know, so we sit here and they are, you know, and they've committed a lot of money to, you know, to that building, to our village, you know, so it's hard for us to say no, and we don't. Carol does, and most of us say yes, because we're kind of stuck, right? I mean, so, you could see if someone else that says, well, I bought this whole other wing, now I want my name up there, and that was never our intent. For the code. The code does not allow that. So it's,
I mean, one of the interesting things about that particular case, as, you know, I think Julie was alluding to different regulations for different types of buildings. So like the building where everyone has an individual entrance to a retail or service establishment, like
Pampered
Yuppie
Pups,
Puppy
Yuppie Pu-
or
Yuppie Puppy and
the Target
CrossFit Lake
Outlets
Forest.
or,
Yeah.
you know, Carriage Way. You know, it's common to allow individual signs there, but this is going to a different building type. This is the type where there is, you know, a central interior corridor and just one entrance for the whole building, and yet we've allowed individual tenant
Signs.
names on it.
Yeah.
Right.
which you could say, you know, this is probably more important than Yuppie Puppy. You know, so I could see where there's a, you know, it's like, they could battle that,
But
you know.
if I remember correctly, they wanted just to increase the size of the numbers on the building, the address of the building. It wasn't the individual
Yeah, that was-
names on it. Am I?
Well,
That was the second time, I
That's the
think.
last meeting. Well, really, I mean, really, there were 3 times if you
Yeah.
go way back, but that was before Tim's time with the first one. Because, I mean, first, which tenant was first?
The Lake Forest Pediatrics.
Yeah, the Lake Forest
Yeah.
Pediatrics was first, and then that was several years ago, and then
Yeah.
Westmoreland came in a couple years ago, and then the last couple times were for the 917 address, and they came back
It
at
was-
least twice
It was
to discuss
was it the eye
size.
doctor?
Yeah, it
that.
was the eye doctor.
Yeah.
Yeah, the eye doctor wanted the 917
Yeah.
address.
He wanted it
sign
big,
there. Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
big.
really big.
Really big. Yeah.
So watch out for his patients driving on that street.
Yeah,
And we may have made the mistake in the first place of letting the the other one go up.
Yep.
Because that set the precedent that there could be letters on the building, and
Yep.
if I recall right, we didn't say anything to the owner of the building about this is the only one. You
That's what I'm
can't
saying,
have
we,
another one.
we created a very small snowball that.
Oh, I think we did.
Has
But, you
become-
know, the message isn't out there, which is what needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
It needs to be in writing. This is how we work with multi-tenant buildings.
Right.
But we do need to be,
No, and the tenants don't know.
yeah, but we do need to be fair, you know, I mean, we can be very restrictive, I think it's easy to be restrictive, but it may not be conducive to enticing people to come either. You know, like if the landlord didn't tell, allegedly, say, or hypothetically, whatever word to get me out of a lawsuit I need to say, you know, if he said you can't put your name up on the building, you know, maybe they would choose to go to a different municipality. You know, you don't know, so I don't think I'm gonna be so restrictive where people can't market their, you know, their business. I mean, that's part of having a business, is being able to put it out there. So I just don't know how you do it, you know, I mean, that's the challenge.
Well, we're gonna figure that out. Ed?
Yeah,
I mean, I don't really have anything further than what we just kind of discussed. I think those are kind of the, you know, to me, the bigger issues, so.
Well, the whole area, the initials L that you refer to light industrial. That's how it started out many, many, many years ago. It hasn't been light industrial for quite a long time.
I was very confused when I got here.
yeah, that's,
It's not named what it is.
no. And we're trying to create this environment, but we just don't have the parameters set to do that.
And it almost seems to me that it's time for us to rezone the area as to what we intended to go to. You know, it's converting gradually to office and retail, and there's fewer and fewer light industrial out there, and with the cost of land in this area, I can't visualize light industrial coming here anymore.
Yep.
So anyway, that's the basic thought I've got. Now it's up to you.
I kind of agree with all you guys about that. And just to see a more, I don't know, see signage that is the same across the board. That'd be nice. Seems like right now there's all kinds of stuff going on. Like, I don't know, like, this one, 960, 970 North Shore Drive. I mean, there's all kinds of different signs that look different.
Okay, I guess,
No, I did it.
yeah, it's the first one in our photo set here, but
Yeah.
I think Mike's gonna put it up on the board there.
Do you need me to do anything here?
I mean, it's fine. We all have
I made
copies,
it.
don't we?
Okay, got it.
Okay.
There.
I actually made a list, and I'm glad that we're pointing out the different buildings, and thank you for, you know, categorizing the different buildings, because the one with Yuppie Puppy, the
Yeah.
960 actually has a sign band designed into the building, and it is condoed out. It was intended to be that way and built that way, and yet the other one where, you know, that signage brouhaha was compressed into
Yeah.
different meetings, right, almost back to back. You know, we had the tenant who said they were promised the sign in their lease, the landlord who said, no, that's not the way it was, and then we had yet another tenant come in, you know, we had even been promised by the first presenter that no one else would come in and ask for a sign. You know, you can't promise that. We
Yeah.
can't assume that. So they're both excellent examples of a different kind of building type, but neither one is a foolproof system. So I actually did make a list. So I would say, for instance, yes to signage that just doesn't need the ABR review, and I think something like the Yuppie Puppy building is a good example of that, you know, where you have a sign band, you know where the area is, you know, we don't really want to tell them what they should and shouldn't write. You know, it's a piece of space they're allowed to use for their frontage, and I think that's great. We can do more of that. We pioneered it, I think, on Block 1 downtown, and it's worked in the Target outlets, and it's worked in this building, which has a single owner. And another great thing about it is that if it's tenant standard signage, that there's something written down that the landlord is gonna have the tenants agree to. If it's tenant standard signage, then, you know, Mike can look at it and we're done. You know, we don't need to see it. So I think those are great things. There could also be tenant standard signage in different kinds of buildings, but this one that is up now is, you know, a perfect example of that, where if a tenant is going to meet that standard, it doesn't need to come to the ABR, and we don't need to spend the time on it. And the ABR could probably go on to some other things. Over the years, there have been complaints about how much time is spent on signage. and I don't speak for any of the present people necessarily, but we did have one member resign saying, you know, I didn't join this group to do signs, I thought it was gonna be about buildings and construction. So, you know, it was not a happy moment, because would have loved to keep him. And I think we need to have some general guidelines written. I mean, we all talk about what we want a sign to be, and we talk to the people who come in, but, you know, it's to reduce the visual clutter in our community, whether we're talking about commercial district or you know, something else. And it's to achieve parity, because we get into the problem that we just talked about with, you know, the one tenant who needed the sign on a building that really should have had building signage rather than tenant signage, and then we felt compelled to add another tenant. And sometimes we can sundown those kinds of signs, you know, eventually get rid of them, but we started something we didn't mean to start there, I think. I think we should say that right out loud. I don't think there is always a time that we have to say yes, so it's important to identify what those times are. The multi-tenant I had on my list, that's number 3 on my list. Everybody's talked about that. I think we probably covered it a lot, so I will move on from that, except to say that it's the landlord that's required to do that multi-tenant sign out there in the parkway. You know, it's not everybody gets to pick which way they want to do it. This photo is a perfect example. There's the landlord showing, you know, something along the lines of a building directory, and then there's some other kind of tenant signage that happens interior to the lot. So that's just a great photo for discussion. I think we also need to talk about lighted signs. We've never had a way to measure light. I've always been anxious about the central business district, and things have not necessarily gone bad here in the old historic district, but the first sign that went up after we allowed lighted signs really was troublesome. It was ultra bright, you know, it was nicely designed, I thought, but it was to be backlit letters, and they were so bright you couldn't read the letters. It was just like this ultra bright white strip that you could see as soon as you came down Sheridan Road. So it actually didn't satisfy the requirements of a sign, but we don't have a way to measure the amount of brightness, how much brightness is too much, and we've never had a method of redress, because we just casually say, oh, could you down lamp it if we don't like it? And they go, yeah, sure, you know, but that's the end of it. You know, that's not really a good way to resolve a problem. But there are signs that can adjust their brightness according to atmospheric conditions. I don't know that that is feasible for small tenants, but I think certainly we have to find a way to do that, and certainly levels in the central business district ought to be lower than they are in the industrial park. And I think we've already talked about the industrial park at multiple meetings, you know, the fact that we think it's going retail, and that's a different kind of animal. You know, whether it's a condoing out, as it was phrased, or, you know, just what the nature of the tenants in the building are, but it's not going to be a single industrial warehouse with a single identity on a single lot with a single ownership. So that's really where push comes to shove, and it has for us. And I don't know what we do to streamline the administrative hours on these kinds of things. I think mostly Mike goes in and sweet talks people when they violate the ordinance, and eventually you prevail, but it probably takes a lot of staff time.
Right.
So the more clarity we can give, the more consistency and uniformity, you know, the better off we'd be. And I personally think we ought to take a good look at dark sky. We ought to use that language in our ordinances. You know, the SEC is working on it, but signage lives here, and the SEC, I think, is even going to approach maybe lighting in residential areas, which we would never touch. But yay, they're going to take a look at it. But I think it's also an education, communication thing. So you need to state what your goals are with these ordinances, and we need to use words like we believe in dark sky, or people don't know what body of thinking we have, what body of knowledge we're referring to. And we need to communicate with designers, because they're the ones who get us backed into a corner on lighting. You know, whether it's what, you know, Bob mentioned, the last parking lot we were looking at, where he said, oh, you know, if your light standards are all the way over there, as I'm driving down the road, I can look right up into it, because, you know, a full shield cutoff only talks about the horizontal plane. That's actually not good enough, really, in a lot of cases. You get a ton of glare from a tall fixture that you look up into, and that's not addressed at all in most ordinances. So I'd say dark sky gives a really good starting point, and you can back off from there when you feel it's too strenuous, but it's the perfect place to start talking about what the concepts are. So let's just do some general discussion. I mean, I don't know where we want to go with this. Did you want to step in?
No, I mean, just in terms of kind of speaking about this specific, I just had kind of one question, well, a couple questions. Speaking about this specific issues, the signs in these industrial districts. So it sounds like that the approach of looking at it rather than just a set of standards for the district, but looking at it by the development types that occur within the district is the direction we all want to go. And that things like adding in the master sign plan option, whether it be by the ABR doing the approval, or if there's exemptions, the ABR and the village board doing approvals, is also something that you would like to see kind of moving forward into this draft. I just want to double check with everybody.
Thanks, Arista. Why doesn't someone just jump in?
The one thing that I don't think we've discussed yet tonight is what started this whole thing is the full window graphic that was on the wine shop. And that's what kicked this whole thing off. So did you happen to see that one?
Yes, the wine store that's got the full banner and the graphic.
Yeah.
Right.
it was,
Full graphic, yeah, I did see
question is
that, I
whether
did drive past.
that type of thing should even be allowed.
Right.
As I drive around the North Shore, I am seeing more and more things like that. So it's something that's starting to happen in more places. And it's a function of retail, which is one of the big questions.
You know, and the interesting thing about that particular graphic is they were showing a product that they sold there in their graphic, but then when we approached them about having a sign without a permit, they pointed out that Pasquesi had flowers in a window that they weren't using as a window, which, I don't know, I guess you could argue that flowers is a product that Pasquesi sold, but it was really just a pretty picture of flowers.
Well, and they had a good point.
They used that as their, interesting.
Yeah.
Pasquesi took their pictures down rather than come here for approval of them.
There you go.
And there you have it.
That's funny.
Yeah. I just think we have so many challenges and we don't even know what our challenges are until they come up, right? So, and we're always responding to a single challenge instead of like creating.
As opposed to
It
staying
is.
ahead of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or we punt it, like, do it, you have a year, and we'll figure it out in a year, which is why the alcohol banners are still up. So I just think it's such a wide swath of issues. I don't know how there's just, I think it's gonna be hard to pigeonhole, like, for this kind of situation, we do this and this. I just think it's not that simple, because we're converting from one district to another. We're up against a lot of stuff. It's not like Target. Target was clean. This is our world and this is what we want to see. I mean, that's successful because we were able to help direct from the beginning. Whereas I think with a lot of these, we're just fighting each
Yeah.
battle.
Well, the target group was awesome. They came in frequently. They
Yeah.
brought their entire team in every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, it was
In
great.
case a question about something they hadn't thought of came
Yeah.
up, they always had it done by the next meeting,
Yeah.
which I can't say that about my work habits, so, I was very impressed.
Yeah.
So, how about the master sign plan notion and, capital letters?